Right now, as you're listening to this, something is happening on your scalp that almost no one ever talks about, and yet it quietly decides whether your hair will keep growing or slowly disappear. Most women don't feel it, don't see it, and definitely aren't warned about it, but thousands of hair follicles are making a choice in this very moment. They are deciding whether they still have what they need to survive or whether it's time to shut down for good. And what's unsettling is that for many women over 60, that decision isn't being driven by genetics or bad luck, but by something far more ordinary and far more fixable. Something as simple as what you did or didn't eat this morning. Here's the part that catches almost everyone off guard. The most common pattern of hair thinning that physicians in the United States monitor doesn't start with sudden shedding or dramatic bald spots. It begins quietly, almost politely, with hair that grows a little slower, feels a little finer, and breaks a little more easily than it used to. You might notice more strands in your brush or on your pillow, but it doesn't feel urgent, so it's easy to ignore. But underneath the surface, the follicles are weakening, and once enough of them cross a certain threshold, they don't come back. That's why what you're about to hear matters so much, because by the time hair loss feels obvious, much of the damage has already been done. Most women are told this is just aging, that it's inevitable, that after a certain point your hair simply thins and that's that. But doctors who actually study hair biology know that explanation is incomplete because aging alone doesn't make hair fall out. What aging does is increase your dependence on very specific nutrients, and when those nutrients quietly disappear from your daily routine, your follicles are left unprotected. They begin to starve, not in a dramatic way, but in a slow, silent way that eventually leads to permanent loss. This is where food enters the story, not as a trend or a miracle cure, but as a biological signal that tells your follicles whether to keep fighting or to give up. What's fascinating is that medical research from universities across the United States keeps circling back to the same conclusion. Certain fruits contain compounds that directly support hair follicle strength, circulation, and hormone balance. And when those fruits are missing from the diet, hair thinning accelerates. This isn't about expensive serums or prescriptions. It's about nutrients your body recognizes instantly and knows how to use. And by the time we reach the fruit that matters most, you'll understand why some doctors now consider food one of the most powerful tools for protecting hair as we age. But to really understand why this works, you first need to understand what your hair is asking for. Every strand on your head is anchored by a follicle that depends on collagen for structure, blood flow for oxygen, and a calm, low inflammation environment to function properly. As we get older, collagen production drops, circulation becomes less efficient, and inflammation quietly increases throughout the body. None of this happens overnight, but together they create the perfect conditions for follicles to weaken. When that happens, hair doesn't just fall out. It becomes thinner, shorter, and eventually stops growing altogether. This is why some women notice that even when their hair still grows, it never seems to reach the length or thickness it once did. The follicle is still alive, but it's struggling. And struggling follicles are incredibly sensitive to nutrition. Give them what they need consistently, and they can stabilize and even improve. Ignore them, and they slowly shrink until there's nothing left to save. That's the line you don't want to cross. And it's why timing matters so much. Let's start where most doctors don't. With a fruit, almost everyone overlooks. Guava doesn't look impressive sitting in a grocery store, and many people walk right past it without a second thought. But research conducted at American universities has revealed something remarkable about this tropical fruit and aging hair. Guava contains extraordinarily high levels of vitamin C, far more than oranges or apples. And vitamin C isn't just an immune nutrient. It's a critical building block for collagen, the protein that gives your hair its strength and resilience. Collagen is what surrounds and supports each hair shaft as it grows out of the scalp. When collagen levels drop, hair becomes fragile, snaps easily, and loses its ability to stay anchored. Doctors often explain this to older patients by comparing collagen to scaffolding. When the scaffolding is strong, hair stands firm. When it weakens, everything built on it starts to collapse. After 60, your body naturally produces less collagen, which is why hair texture changes so noticeably. But guava steps in right where your body falls short. One medium guava can provide several times the daily requirement for vitamin C, and unlike synthetic supplements, the vitamin C in guava comes packaged with natural compounds that help your body absorb and use it efficiently. This matters because absorption declines with age. You can take all the pills you want, but if your body can't utilize them, your follicles won't benefit. Guava solves that problem naturally, and when eaten regularly, it helps maintain the collagen structure your hair depends on. What's important here is consistency. Eating guava once won't change anything, but incorporating it into your routine 2 or 3 times a week creates a steady supply of vitamin C that supports ongoing collagen production. Over time, that translates into hair that breaks less, sheds less, and feels stronger to the touch. But as helpful as guava is, it addresses only one piece of the puzzle. And there's another fruit that targets a problem most women don't even realize is affecting their hair. That problem is inflammation, and it plays a much bigger role in hair loss than most people are ever told. Chronic, low-grade inflammation increases with age and can be triggered by stress, poor sleep, medications, and dietary changes. When inflammation reaches the scalp, it disrupts the delicate environment hair follicles need to function. Follicles don't respond well to chaos, and when the area around them becomes inflamed, they slowly retreat. This is where papaya enters the picture. Papaya contains an enzyme called papain, which has been studied extensively in American medical research for its anti-inflammatory properties. Papain works at the cellular level to calm inflammation and support tissue repair, and when that effect reaches the scalp, it creates a safer, more stable environment for hair follicles. Many women assume their hair is thinning purely because of hormones or age, but inflammation is often the hidden accelerant that pushes follicles over the edge. Papaya also brings vitamin A and antioxidants into the mix, which further protect follicles from damage. But there's another benefit that's easy to overlook and just as important. Papaya supports digestion, and digestion is the gateway to nutrition. If your digestive system isn't functioning efficiently, the nutrients you eat never reach your hair. They pass through your body without ever making an impact. By supporting digestion, papaya ensures that the nutrients you consume actually get delivered to your scalp where they're needed most. Eating papaya a few times a week can quietly reduce inflammation while improving nutrient absorption, and that combination can slow the progression of hair thinning in a way many women never expect. But even with inflammation under control, follicles still need oxygen and nutrients delivered through healthy blood flow. Without circulation, even the best nutrients can't do their job. And that's where the next fruit becomes critical. Kiwi may be small, but its impact on circulation is anything but. Research conducted at American universities and reviewed in FDA-monitored studies has highlighted vitamin E as one of the most important nutrients for scalp blood flow, and kiwi is one of the richest natural sources available. Vitamin E helps protect blood vessels and improves the delivery of oxygen-rich blood to tiny capillaries, including the ones that feed your hair follicles. Poor circulation doesn't just affect hands and feet. It affects the scalp as well. And when follicles don't receive enough oxygen, they begin to suffocate. They slow down, weaken, and eventually stop producing healthy hair. Kiwi addresses this by supporting vascular health throughout the body, and when eaten regularly, it helps restore the flow your follicles depend on to survive. Kiwi also contains zinc, a mineral essential for hair tissue repair and oil gland function. When oil glands around the follicles stop working properly, the scalp becomes dry, hair becomes brittle, and growth suffers. Kiwi provides zinc in a balanced, natural form that supports these processes without overwhelming the body. It's a quiet but powerful contributor to follicle stability, and when combined with the effects of guava and papaya, it begins to build a foundation for healthier hair. At this point, you might notice a pattern forming. Each fruit supports a different weakness that develops with age, collagen loss, inflammation, circulation. But there's another layer to hair thinning that hasn't been addressed yet, and it's one of the most common reasons women over 60 feel like their hair is disappearing despite doing everything right. That layer involves oxidative stress and hormonal balance, and the next fruit targets both at once. Oranges are often dismissed as ordinary, but their true power has little to do with basic vitamin C. What makes oranges special for hair health is their bioflavonoids, compounds that work alongside vitamin C to protect cells from oxidative damage. Oxidative stress is essentially cellular aging caused by environmental exposure, stress, and time. And it's one of the main reasons hair follicles age faster than they should. Bioflavonoids strengthen the tiny blood vessels in the scalp and reduce the oxidative burden placed on follicles. Research from U.S. medical institutions has shown that people who consume citrus bioflavonoids regularly tend to maintain healthier hair follicles and experience slower thinning over time. The white pith of the orange, the part most people discard, contains the highest concentration of these compounds, which is why whole fruit is far more effective than juice. Oranges also support adrenal health, which plays a subtle but significant role in hormone regulation. When stress hormones are poorly regulated, hair growth hormones are affected as well. By supporting this balance, oranges help create conditions where follicles receive clearer signals to keep growing. It's not dramatic or immediate, but over months, it can make a visible difference. Everything we've discussed so far has been building toward one final piece: the fruit that medical research across the United States has linked most directly to protecting follicles from permanent damage. This is the fruit many physicians, including Dr. William Li, emphasize when discussing diet and cellular health because it addresses the root cause of progressive hair loss rather than just the symptoms. This final fruit targets the hormonal process that causes follicles to shrink, a process known as miniaturization. And once that process goes too far, hair loss becomes permanent. Understanding how this works and how to slow it may completely change the way you think about your hair and what it needs to survive. And that's exactly where we'll go next. Because what happens when this hormone meets your follicles is the difference between thinning hair and hair that holds on. If you've ever wondered why some women seem to lose hair rapidly after a certain age while others maintain thickness for years, the answer lies here. And once you understand it, you'll never look at your breakfast the same way again. The reason everything you've heard so far matters comes down to one quiet, relentless process that almost no one warns women about, and yet it's responsible for the most permanent form of hair loss seen after 60. This isn't shedding from stress or temporary thinning from illness. This is follicle miniaturization, the slow shrinking of hair follicles until they can no longer produce visible hair. And once a follicle reaches that point, it doesn't rest, it doesn't recover, it simply disappears. That's why understanding what triggers this process and how to interfere with it is so critical right now. At the center of this process is a hormone called DHT. It exists in both men and women, and as hormone balance shifts with age, hair follicles become more sensitive to it. DHT binds to receptors in the follicle and gradually chokes off its ability to function. Each growth cycle becomes shorter, each strand becomes thinner, and eventually the follicle produces nothing at all. This is why hair loss after 60 often feels different. It's not dramatic shedding, it's slow vanishing. Ponytails feel lighter, parts look whiter, hair never seems to grow past a certain length, and by the time this pattern is obvious, many follicles are already on borrowed time. What makes this so frustrating is that most women are never told this is happening. They're told it's normal, that it's age, that it's genetics, and that nothing can be done unless they resort to medications with uncomfortable side effects. But medical research has revealed something far more hopeful. Certain foods contain compounds that interfere with the DHT process itself, not by eliminating hormones, but by protecting the follicles from their effects. And this is where strawberries change everything. Strawberries contain a compound called ellagic acid. And this compound has been studied extensively in U.S. medical research for its ability to protect cells from hormone-related damage. Ellagic acid doesn't try to suppress hormones. Instead, it alters how follicles respond to them. Think of your hair follicle like a door with a lock. DHT carries the key. Once it opens that door, the follicle begins to shrink. Ellagic acid changes the shape of the lock, so the key no longer works the way it used to. DHT can still exist in the body, but it has a much harder time binding to the follicle. This matters because it addresses the root cause of progressive hair loss rather than chasing symptoms. Studies conducted at major American universities have shown that people who regularly consume ellagic acid-rich foods experience significantly less follicle miniaturization over time. These weren't people taking drugs or undergoing treatments. They were simply eating foods like strawberries consistently. Over 6 months, researchers observed measurable differences in follicle size and hair density compared to those who didn't consume these compounds. But strawberries don't stop there. They also contain anthocyanins, powerful antioxidants that improve circulation and reduce inflammation at the same time. Remember how inflammation quietly disrupts follicles and poor circulation starves them? Strawberries address both problems simultaneously. They calm the environment around the follicle while improving blood flow that delivers oxygen and nutrients. This combination is rare, and it's why berries repeatedly show up in research related to cellular aging and tissue preservation. There's another layer most people never consider. Strawberries are rich in manganese, a mineral essential for producing proline, an amino acid that helps build collagen. That means strawberries don't just protect follicles from hormonal damage, they also support the structural framework that holds hair in place. Stronger collagen means stronger anchoring. Stronger anchoring means less breakage, less shedding, and hair that feels fuller over time. Consistency is everything here. 1 or 2 strawberries won't make a difference. The research points to regular intake, about a full cup, several times a week, as the threshold where these protective effects begin to matter. Fresh strawberries are ideal, but frozen ones work as well, as long as they're unsweetened. They can be eaten alone, added to yogurt, blended into smoothies, or mixed into oatmeal. The method doesn't matter. The repetition does. At this point, something important becomes clear. Each fruit you've heard about plays a specific role. Guava supports collagen. Papaya calms inflammation and improves absorption. Kiwi restores circulation and repair. Oranges protect follicles from oxidative stress and hormonal imbalance. Strawberries defend follicles against the very process that causes permanent loss. Together, they form a system of support that addresses hair loss from every angle, not aggressively, but intelligently. This is why doctors who study nutrition and aging don't talk about single miracle foods. They talk about patterns. When these fruits are missing from the diet, follicles lose protection on multiple fronts at once. When they're reintroduced consistently, the environment around the follicle begins to stabilize. Hair doesn't suddenly grow thicker overnight, but shedding slows, breakage decreases, and over time, remaining follicles regain strength. What's critical to understand is timing. Follicles that are still producing hair, even thin hair, can often be supported and protected. Follicles that have already shut down cannot. That's why waiting is the real danger. Every month without proper nutritional support is another month. Follicles are exposed to inflammation, poor circulation, oxidative stress, and hormonal damage without defense. This is the window where action matters. Many women notice the first signs of improvement, not in growth, but in loss. Less hair in the shower drain, fewer strands on the pillow, hair that feels less wispy at the ends. These are early signals that follicles are stabilizing. Growth follows later, often after several months, because hair cycles are slow, but once follicles stop shrinking, the trajectory changes, and that's the goal. What makes this approach so powerful is that it works with your biology instead of against it. There's no forcing, no shock to the system, just consistent signals telling your follicles that conditions are safe enough to keep going. And while no food can reverse decades of damage overnight, research consistently shows that nutritional support accumulates. The longer you sustain it, the more protection your follicles receive. Now, there's one final piece that ties everything together, and it's not another fruit. It's how these foods work when they're combined, how timing and routine amplify their effects, and how small daily decisions quietly determine whether your hair continues thinning or begins to stabilize. Because knowing what to eat is only half the story. How you integrate it into your life is what determines whether it actually works. And that's exactly where we'll go next. Because the difference between women who see real change and those who don't often comes down to one overlooked habit that either supports everything you've just learned or quietly cancels it out. The difference between women who quietly lose more hair every year and women who manage to slow, stabilize, and sometimes even visibly improve their hair isn't usually motivation or discipline. It's something far subtler. It's whether their daily habits reinforce what their follicles are trying to do, or whether those habits quietly undermine them. Because once you understand how fragile aging follicles actually are, you realize that nutrition alone isn't enough if the timing and context are working against you. Hair follicles live on a cycle, and that cycle is slow. A follicle can take months to respond to changes in its environment, which is why so many women give up too early. They add a few fruits, try for 2 weeks, see nothing dramatic, and assume it doesn't work. But inside the scalp, something very different is happening. The follicle is assessing whether conditions are improving consistently enough to justify staying active. If the signals are mixed, it stays cautious. If the signals are steady, it begins to stabilize. This is why routine matters more than intensity. One of the most common mistakes doctors see is stacking good choices on top of bad timing. Eating the right fruits but skipping meals, or loading them all into a sugary smoothie that spikes blood sugar and increases inflammation, can cancel out many of the benefits. Hair follicles are extremely sensitive to metabolic stress. When blood sugar swings wildly, cortisol rises, and cortisol directly interferes with hair growth signals. This is why women who feel like they're eating healthy sometimes see no improvement at all. The solution isn't complicated, but it is specific. Fruits that support hair follicles work best when they're paired with stability. That means eating them alongside protein, healthy fats, or fiber that slows absorption and prevents spikes. Strawberries with yogurt, kiwi with oatmeal, orange slices after a balanced meal. These small choices send a message to your follicles that the environment is predictable and safety is what encourages growth. Hydration is another silent factor that's often overlooked. Blood flow, nutrient delivery, and scalp health all depend on adequate hydration. As we age, thirst signals become less reliable. So many women are mildly dehydrated without realizing it. This thickens the blood slightly, reduces circulation to peripheral tissues like the scalp, and makes it harder for nutrients to reach follicles. Even the best diet struggles under those conditions. Simply increasing water intake throughout the day can enhance the effects of everything you're eating. Sleep also plays a role most people don't connect to hair. During deep sleep, growth hormones are released and tissue repair accelerates. Chronic poor sleep keeps follicles stuck in a defensive state, prioritizing survival over growth. That's why women who start sleeping better often notice less shedding even before they change their diet. Nutrition and sleep reinforce each other, and when both improve, follicles finally receive a clear signal to hold on. Stress is the final piece. And it's not about eliminating it, which is unrealistic. It's about preventing chronic stress from becoming the background noise of your body. Persistent stress elevates inflammatory markers and disrupts hormone balance, both of which accelerate follicle miniaturization. This is why hair loss often follows emotionally difficult periods, even months later. The damage is delayed, but the cause is real. Managing stress through simple routines, walking, breathing, or structured relaxation protects the progress your nutrition is trying to create. When doctors evaluate hair loss in older women, they don't look at one factor. They look at the environment the follicle lives in. Nutrition provides the building materials, but routine, sleep, hydration, and stress determine whether those materials are used or wasted. This is why some women see improvement within a few months, while others feel stuck despite eating all the right foods. Another overlooked issue is patience. Hair grows about ½ an inch per month at best, and that rate often slows with age. Even if follicles stabilize today, visible changes take time to emerge. The earliest improvements are internal: reduced shedding, less breakage, hair that feels stronger at the roots. These are signs that follicles are no longer shrinking. Growth comes later, and when it does, it's subtle at first, thicker density before longer length, fuller appearance before dramatic change. This is also why consistency over months matters more than perfection for weeks. Missing a day doesn't matter, missing a month does. Follicles respond to trends, not moments. Every week of support adds up. Every week of neglect takes something away. Once you see hair health as a long game, the frustration begins to fade, and realistic expectations take its place. There's one more reason this approach works so well, and it has to do with how the body prioritizes resources. When nutrients are scarce, hair is one of the first things the body sacrifices. It's not essential for survival, but when nutrients are abundant and consistently available, hair becomes a viable investment again. The body shifts from defense to maintenance, and maintenance is where thickness is preserved. This shift doesn't announce itself loudly. It shows up quietly in the mirror one morning when your part looks slightly narrower or when your ponytail feels a little heavier than it did months ago. These changes are easy to dismiss, but they're meaningful. They signal that follicles are still alive and responding. What's powerful about this process is that it's cumulative. The longer you support your follicles, the more resilient they become. And resilience is what protects against future loss. Women who stabilize their hair in their 60s often maintain it into their 70s because the environment around the follicles never becomes hostile enough to trigger another wave of miniaturization. Now, there's one final truth that ties everything together, and it's the hardest one to hear because it involves urgency. Hair follicles don't wait forever. They exist on a timeline, and once they cross a certain point, no nutrition, no routine, no habit can bring them back. Understanding where that point is and how to act before you reach it is the final piece of this story. Because the most important question isn't whether these foods and habits work. The research is clear that they do. The real question is whether you'll start while your follicles are still listening. Here is the truth that most women never hear until it's too late. And once you understand it, everything you've learned so far suddenly becomes urgent. Hair follicles do not die all at once. They fade. They shrink, they weaken, and for a long time, they exist in a fragile middle state where they are still alive, still producing hair, but barely hanging on. This is the window where everything you do matters. Once that window closes, it does not reopen. Doctors who specialize in aging and hair biology often describe this moment as a point of no return, not because the body stops responding to nutrition, but because the follicle itself has collapsed. The opening seals, blood flow no longer reaches it. The signaling pathways shut down. At that stage, even the best diet in the world cannot revive what is no longer there. That is why timing matters more than perfection, and why starting now is infinitely more powerful than starting later. What makes this difficult is that hair loss rarely announces that moment clearly. There is no alarm, no sudden bald patch for most women. Instead, there is a slow normalization of thinning. You adjust your hairstyle. You stop wearing your hair the way you used to. You tell yourself it's fine, that everyone your age goes through this. Meanwhile, follicles are quietly slipping past the point where they can be helped. This is not meant to scare you. It's meant to clarify what's actually at stake. The good news, and this is important, is that if you are still seeing hair grow at all, if your scalp still produces strands, even if they are thin, fragile, or slow growing, then your follicles are still responsive. They are still listening. They are still capable of stabilizing. That is the moment where nutrition, routine, and consistency become powerful. Not dramatic, not miraculous, powerful because they work quietly over time. This is why women who commit to this approach often report the same pattern. The first change is not new growth. It's reduced loss, less hair in the shower, fewer strands on the brush. That alone is a victory, because it means follicles are no longer in free fall. Then comes improved texture. Hair feels stronger, less wispy, more anchored. Only later does visible density begin to shift, and even then, it happens subtly. Others notice it before you do. It's also why comparison is dangerous. Everyone's follicles are at a different stage. Some women start early and preserve most of what they have. Others start later and stabilize what remains. Both outcomes matter. Stabilization is success. Preventing further loss is success. Growth is a bonus, not the baseline. Once you understand this, frustration gives way to realism, and realism is what allows consistency to take hold. Another important shift happens mentally. When you stop chasing quick fixes and start supporting your biology, hair care becomes calmer, less desperate, less reactive. You're no longer trying to force hair to grow. You're creating conditions where it feels safe enough to stay. That mindset alone reduces stress, which further protects follicles. It's a feedback loop that works in your favor instead of against you. And here's something doctors see again and again. Women who take action when thinning first becomes noticeable often maintain their hair for years longer than those who wait. Not because they did something extreme, but because they removed the threats early. Inflammation, poor circulation, hormonal damage, nutrient deficiency. Once those pressures are reduced, follicles don't need to be rescued. They simply need to be maintained. This is why the 5 fruits you've learned about matter so much. Not because they are exotic or expensive, but because they deliver exactly what aging follicles are losing in a form the body recognizes and uses. Collagen support, anti-inflammatory action, circulatory improvement, oxidative protection, hormonal defense. Each one fills a gap that widens with age, and together they form a net that catches follicles before they fall. But knowledge without action changes nothing. The women who see results are not the ones who memorize information. They are the ones who quietly change their routines and stick with them. They buy the fruit, they eat it regularly, they hydrate, they sleep, they give their bodies time, and months later, they realize something has shifted. Not dramatically, but meaningfully. If you are listening to this and thinking, my hair is already too thin, understand this. If it's still growing at all, it's not too late to protect what remains. If you are thinking, I'll start later, understand that follicles don't wait for motivation. They respond to conditions. Every month matters. And starting now, imperfectly, is better than waiting for the perfect plan. Hair loss does not define you, but the way you respond to it can change how you feel in your own body for years to come. You are not powerless here. You are not stuck with one outcome. You have more influence than you were ever told. And now you know exactly where that influence begins. The only remaining question is whether you'll act while your follicles are still willing to listen.